I think he was not well. But regardless,
He was a very snazzy dresser. I remember that.
okay. So again, this week's broadcast is Le'il Nishmas, Chaim ben Abdova Dayan, Jimmy Dayan, whose neshama should have Aliyah, and all of the schusim that he has for sustaining Beis Yaakov Elementary School, making sure that their finances are good, should be benched. Okay, so let's see the Heilige Gemara. I believe we got up to the top of Mem Aleph Amud Aleph, about 8 lines on the top. Ein Nevashlin, and we learned a Mishnah that was actually discussing chametz. It's an interesting Mishnah. The Mishnah is discussing the halachas of things that you put into water and if they become chametz, kemach l'seicharoises, and meinachtam you have to spill out. And in the middle, the Mishnah injects a halacha about how we eat the Korban Pesach, which really is out of place. So Tosha says right over here at the side, Tema lama shanui kan. What in the world is this halacha about eating the Korban Pesach? What relevance does it have to our discussion that's discussing about putting wheat into water? If it's because earlier the previous Mishnah discussed cooked vegetables lagabe mur, well then if the reason why we're introducing cooking because we're talking about cooked mur, so that's where it should be. There was a pause. We went back to discuss Hilchos Chametz, and then the Mishnah gives it an injection over here. So Tosfos bleibt fair, but there are those who discuss and offer different pshat. And the one pshat is since the Mishnah says you are allowed to dip once the Korban Pesach is fully cooked, and it says you're allowed to dip it. What are you going to dip it into? You're going to dip it into these types of dips. So that's why it was relevant, because the dips that we were talking about are charoises and chardal. So that's why it was relevant. Okay, so let's see the Heilige Gemara weiter. Good morning, Shmuel. It's nice to see you back. Zok the Heilige Gemara weiter. Tanu Rabbanon. B'mayim. Morning. So it says b'mayim. Ainli ela b'mayim. I would only know that it's usher to cook the Korban Pesach in water. But shar mashkin minayin. How do you know that you're not allowed to cook the Korban Pesach in some other mashkin? So tomorrow Amid Kalvachemer. Uma mayim she'ein maftikin taimun asurin. Madach water, which doesn't dilute out the flavor of the Korban Pesach, because water is sort of a neutral flavor, and yet the Torah prohibits it. Shar mashkin shemafikin taimon. If you cook the Korban Pesach in other juices where it's going to influence the taste, they will inject into the Korban Pesach whatever taste they have. Like again, surely there's a hakpada that the Torah would not allow it. Rabbi Omer, we know it from a pasuk. B'mayim, ainli elamayim, shar mashkin minayin. Talmud Lomer uvashal mavushal mikol makayim. Because uvashal mavushal ribuyehu. Tahava lelemichtav al toichlu menina umavushal. But it says al toichlu menina ubashal mavushal. So it's a double lashon. So that teaches us that you're not even allowed to cook the Korban Pesach in mashkin other than water. My beinayu, what is the difference between the svara that the first svara of the Gemara that's a Kalvachemer and the Rebbe svara that's a pasuk? So Gemara iki beinayu slikader. The difference is slikader. Rashi's slikader means shemavashlim oishe b'kter v'loy mayim. You bake this meat in a pot with no water, but it will discharge its own juices. V'loy shemashka alamayim haneflotin mishamnoi. The juices that come out of the meat itself, you're going to cook it in its own juices. So Lamandi Aleph Kalvachomer Hachashori. If you learn it out of the Kalvachomer from Mayim, that it's a Matikin Taimon, if it's cooking in its own juices, it's surely not Mafik time. It's surely not introducing an exterior taste. So it would be mutter. But the Rebbe the Aleph Meribuya, but the Rebbe who learns it out of the Ribui of Uvashal Mavushal, Hainami Bashal Mavushalu, this was also considered cooked. Slikat is also considered cooked. So that would be the nafkamina between whether you know this from a Kalvachomer or whether you know this from a pasuk. Rabbanan, hi Bashal Mavushal, my Adalahu. Rebbe is using Bashal Mavushal to tell you that you cannot do tzlikader or you cannot cook this meat in any other juices. What is the Rabbanan going to do who learns it from a Kavachomer? What are they going to do with the extra Boshel Mabushel? So tomorrow, we need it for what we learned in the Brisa. What's the halach of Boshloi? First you cooked it. The Achach Tzoloi, and then you roasted it. Oishet Tzoloi, or you roasted it. The Achach Bishloi, and after you cooked it. Chayiv will be Chayiv. And Rashi says, Chayiv Malkas al Achilosa. You're going to be over the lav of Al Toichlu Mimenu. Al Toichlu Mimenu is a lav with which you're Chayiv Malkas. And even if you roast it at some point, but if it's cooked at some point, you're going to be Chayiv because you're eating the Korban Pesach not properly prepared. Zok the Gemara, Bishlam and Bishloi v'achach tzali. I understand if you cooked it first and then you roasted it. Chayiv v'chayiv da boshloi. Because at the end of the day, if you cook it and then you roast it, it was prepared by cooking. The roasting that you do afterwards does not cook it anymore. It's already completely cooked. Elat tzali v'achach bishloi. If you completely roasted it and then you cooked it, hatzlieshu. It's already tzliesh. The fact that you cook it afterwards will not take away from the fact that it was prepared through roasting. So why is it a problem? Why can't you do it? Rav Kahana, Hamani Rabbi Yosy. This is going to go according to Rabbi Yosy. The Tanya, Rabbi Yosy learns, and what Rashi tells us, Rabbi Yosy Shita is that bishul after afiyah is considered bishul. Even though logic could indicate that if I roasted it, how could cooking it afterwards change anything? It's already completely prepared through roasting. You see that the bishul achar afiyah would be a problem. Why? Because it says as follows: Yotzin barakik ashari. Never if somebody cannot eat matzah and he needs to soften it up, he's allowed to soak it in water. Yotzin barakik ashari ubemavushel shaloi nimuach. You could be yotzah the mitzvah of matzah if the matzah is soaked. So Rashi says they chavis matzah barakik ashari v'tavshil lachafiyosay. After you bake the matzah, if you soak it in the tavshil, v'afalpisha mismasmes, even though it's dissolving. Lechem, even it's in its dissolved state, it still has a status of lechem, and you'll be mekayim the mitzvah of matzah. Calls manchu kayim, as long as there's something left to it and it's not completely dissolved. That's what Rabbi Shita is. But Rabbi Yosy holds yotzim barakah kashari, partially dissolved, will retain its status of lechem. If you cook it after you bake it, if you cook this matzah after it was baked, even if it's intact, it's not going to be matzah anymore. Zokt Rashi, the lav lechem karinabe. The fact that you cooked it afterwards will change its status from lechem to non-lechem. Even though it already had a status of lechem and it was fully baked in the oven before you cooked it, so the Gemara wants to say that this brisa that we quoted that says if you roasted the Korban Pesach properly and only afterward you cooked it, you're not yotzeh, will follow the shita of Rabbi Yosy, who holds that even the second cooking, after it's already fully prepared properly, will still create a problem. And just as by matzah, it takes away its status of lechem, of baked lechem, so too by Korban Pesach, when you cook it after it's roasted, it takes away its status of tzli. Ula Amar, afilu temer Rab Meir. Even Rab Meir, who by matzah holds that if it's mavushal, your yotzeh, and cooking it after you bake it does not take away its status of lechem. By Korban Pesach, it'll be worse. Shiny hacha, the Amar Kra, uvashal mavushal mikal makom. We actually have a special pasuk. The special pasuk could tell you that even though logically, or you see in other places, cooking it after tzliya shouldn't have an impact, but you have a special pasuk to tell you that by Korban Pesach it wouldn't be allowed. So it's a special gzeres hakasav by Pesach that you're not even allowed to cook it after it's fully baked. You might have thought that if it's over roasted, we're going to soon see this means if it's over roasted and like burnt almost to a crisp, you might think that you'd be chayiv because it's not called proper sleep. Talmud Loimar. The two prohibitions are raw, and raw doesn't mean completely raw. Raw it means rare, it means undercooked, or if it's cooked in water. No, and not if it's completely burnt. Hey Chadami, what is exactly the status of this meat? How prepared is it? Amarvashi the shavi charucha. You made it burnt that it's like a coal. It's badly burnt. So Rashi talks about it over here. Rashi says, the lav tzli. It's not called tzli ela koli. It's called burnt. It's not called roasted. It's called burnt. Koli v'sorf. So it doesn't qualify under the heading of tzli. Charucha Rashi sorf. It's burnt. Tanu Rabbanon. Yochel achal chai achal kazayis chai. What if you ate something that was totally raw? Rashi's chai is legamri shlonista klal. No, Rashi says it's tzli ve'en tzli. It's roasted, but it's not properly roasted, so it would be called rare. So yochel achal kazayis chai. You might think if you ate meat that was completely raw, so sushi, yehei chayiv, you'd be chayiv. Talmud loymar al toichel menu no uvoshel melushel. No uvoshel omartilach. Only these two specific things are the lav, but the loichai, yochel yeh mutter. You might think, okay, if it's not included in the lav, so then it should be mutter lechatchila. Talmud loymer kiyim tzliesh. We do have a general clause that says kiyim tzliesh, and therefore, in order to be yoch the mitzvah, it has to be tzliesh, and if not, you're over on the same. However, you're over a lav, and you get malchus if you eat it no, which means partially roasted or cooked. Rashi yochel yemuter lechel b'menu chai lechatchila, ta'afilu isura nami lecha. Talmud loymer atoichlu b'menu no kiyim tzliesh. V'lo yizeh, but chai wouldn't be allowed she'eino tzli. Zok Rashi, and this is under dispute for Tosus, is v'havi lav shabachlolis. This is called a lav shabachlolis because it doesn't say specifically what you're not allowed to do. It's atoichlu b'menu no kiyim tzliesh. So kiyim tzliesh is sort of explaining the original lav of atoichlu b'menu no. And kiyum tzliesh is a lav shabachlolis because it's not specifying anything that's specifically usher. It's saying anything that's not tzliesh will be included in the lav. The high Tana Sover ain't like in a lav shabachlolis. And this time over here holds that you don't get malchus, even though you're not allowed to eat the korban pesach that's completely raw. Nevertheless, you don't get malchus for it because it's a lav shabachlolis. What is the definition of no? Amarav kedamri parsoi abarnayim. Zok Rashi, what does that mean? Oizet tzliyah shabaloshin parsi koy abarnayim beloshin hakodesh karina. And I think we refer to it as rare. I'm not sure how rare it has to be, but if it's still mooing, then you know for sure it's rare. Zok the Gemara weiter. Amar Chista. Hamavashal b'chamei tveria b'Shabbos. If someone cooks in chamei tveria on Shabbos.
Means that it is cooked, right?
It's partially cooked, not proper, but not fully cooked.
So who defines it has to be burnt?
No, burnt is not no. Burnt is another disqualification.
What I'm saying is, at what point did you say?
At what point is fully cooked? Well, if you ask me, if it's not red inside anymore, we all. I mean, every man is an expert in sleek because we all barbecue. So I would assume it can't be rare. It has to be fully cooked. You might have somebody who likes his meat rare saying, "What are you talking about? The way you do it, it's chorach." So I'm not sure exactly how you decide, but I would assume it means it has to be thoroughly roasted through and through, without being burnt. And for that, you have to know how to do barbecues. That's a whole different mahalach. Okay, so Zok the Gemara weiter. If you cook in chametz tveria, and we know what chametz tveria is, mayonis roiskin. It's hot water, but it's not cooked by fire. So the halach is b'Shabbos potter. On Shabbos you're going to be potter because you're not cooking al ish. Pesach shaboshlu b'chametz tveria, you'll be chayiv. If you cook Pesach b'chametz, you're chayiv alachilosoi v'kasol kadaitach mishud loisoich u'muchoshel. So Pashtus, the Gemara is assuming that it's considered cooked. So the problem here is, how in heavens can one cook the korban Pesach in chametz tveria? We're supposed to eat the korban Pesach in Yerushalayim. So exactly how would you be able to take it to Tveria and cook it? You're not allowed to eat it in Tveria. So that's what some of the Rishonim struggle with. There's a whole bunch of different svaros that are offered. The most poshut teretz is quite simple. If you eat it cooked in Tveria, you get petched twice. One for eating it out of Yerushalayim, and one for eating it cooked. That was one shot. Other Rishonim suggested that maybe they had a pipeline. They didn't pipe fuel in, but they piped in, theoretically, if you pipe in water in an insulated pipe from Tveria to Yerushalayim, that's how you do it. I'm sorry? The Imre Emes says that it's possible to do it in a thermos. if you collect chametz feria in a thermos, in an insulated bottle, then you could bring it to your slab and cook in it. And that has huge impacts la halacha. Because normally a klisheni is not mavashal. Yet the Imre Emers learns from this Gemara that a klisheni is mavashal. So therefore on Shabbos, if you have hot water in a thermos, it would not be considered a klisheni according to the Imre Emers, and you would not be able to put tavlin or coffee into hot water that was in a thermos. Because when it's in a thermos, there's a problem of bishul, and it's also considered hatmana, according to the Imre Emers.
Couple of things, Yosy Zalman. A klisheni generally is not a thermos, right? It's not an insulated klisheni, right? We're not talking about that type of a klisheni. That's number one. Number two, the idea that an insulated.
But that's the Imre Emers' point. That's the whole point of the Imre Emers. A klisheni means if you pour it from the pot into a cup, that's a klisheni. But if you pour it from the pot into an insulated keli, that's different.
Right. I definitely see where he's coming from. The other thing is even a thermos or an insulated pipe, you remember it's got to come from Tveria, which is a couple of hours distance, all the way to Yerushalayim and still be, Yosy Zalman, hot enough to cook. Now, chametz feria is not so hot. I mean, people bathe in chametz feria.
I'll make sure to size the pump big enough to create the velocity that the chametz feria will get there in less than 2 hours.
Okay, but keep in mind that people
it's
bathe
got to
in
go about
chametz
100
feria.
miles an hour. It's got to travel 100 miles an hour to get there.
Yeah, you have to have a powerful pump.
Uphill.
You have to do a powerful pump. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I'm sorry?
The line's higher than Tveria too.
It is, yeah.
So you have to
I like getting pitched twice.
Okay.
That seems to me the most practical one.
I like neither of them. There's got to be a better terrace than that.
Let's see. I'll tell you the terrace that you're going to like. The terrace that you're going to like is, you know how you say front axle in a Vrit?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. You told us this once. It's very good.
Rear axle kadmi.
Right.
That's how you say in a Brit front axle. Rear axle kadmi. Because they don't chop that rear means back and axle means axle. They think an axle is called a rear axle because they don't know English. So the
now apply it.
Israeli mechanics use for the front axle is a rear axle kadmi. So what did I have to do with this? Because they always trying to learn that there could be hot springs in Yerushalayim as well, but they're always referred to as chametz feria.
That's
So
a
it's called
better terrace.
May Gehinnom is right next to, it's right in Yerushalayim.
So that's what it's referred to.
Wow.
Just that we're most familiar with chametz feria, so that's why the Gemara uses that nusach, but really it means any hot spring.
I agree. That's the best terrace.
No. I plagiarize. I don't make anything up. I only plagiarize. Everything I heard from Rabbi Elephant. And sometimes when you probe me a little bit, I remember a little bit more of what Rabbi Elephant says. Because although elephants never forget, people who listen to elephants do forget. I'm a vashel b'chametz feria. It's a brand name. I'm a vashel b'chametz feria b'Shabbos. You know, you can have a big, beautiful bottle that has chametz feria on it, bottled in Portugal. Amr Chista, I'm a vashel b'chametz feria. B'Shabbos potter. Now Pesach shabishlo b'chametz feria chayiv. Frag the Gemara. My shna b'Shabbos, the loy, they told us eish be'inon v'leka. In order to qualify as bishul, it has to be a told of eish, and you don't have that. The Christ lav told us eishu, hilchach lav bishulu, to lav v'chay b'shum avalocha. So I would say Pesach nami lav told us eishu. So why is it considered bishul? Amarava, my chayiv dikatani, when it says chayiv for eating Pesach shabishla v'chametz feria, it means the ka'avar mishum tzliyesh. You're not chayiv out the boshel mavushel, but you're over on the losoichel ki im tzliyesh. Rashi mishum tzliyesh, lav losoichel ki im tzliyesh ika. But loy lav the bishel, b'saver loikin alav shabatolis. So this lav of ki im tzliyesh, which is really explaining the al toichlu mimenu tzliyesh, that is a lav shabatolis. So if you hold the lav shabatolis, you don't get malchus for, like we said earlier, then you won't get malchus for it. But if you hold, you do get malchus for a lav shabaklolis, so then you would get malchus for eating not only something that was cooked in chametz feria, you'd also get malchus for eating something that was chai, because it's all in the heading of kiyum tzliyesh, or if it's completely roasted, all those variations that don't fit into the two categories of no or bashal mavusal, but they're not sliesh, they'll all be chayiv this lav shabachlolis, and therefore, if you hold the malchus for lav shabachlolis, you get malchus, and if not, no. Rav Chia bar Rav Nasan. I'm sorry. Rav Chia bar Rav Nasan masni la Rav Chisda behedya. Rav Chia bar Rav Nasan actually learns this thing, Rav Chisda, this explanation of affairs. Rav Chisda mavashal b'chametz feri b'Shabbos potter. So instead of us having to understand Reb Chisda and to provide the explanation that the ka'avar mishum tzliesh, this is something that Reb Chisda himself said according to this nusach. Amarava, achlu na. If you ate the korban pesach no, which means not fully cooked, the halacha is loika shtayim. You get two malchus. Why do you get two malchus? Zok Rashi. Mishum loy soichlu na, mishum loy soichlu kiyim tzliesh. The kiyim tzliesh nami alav loy soichlu. So clearly, Rava is saying that your loika are alav shabachlolos. So when you eat na, not only do you violate the specific isser of al toichlu menu na, but you're also over the general isser of al toichlu menu kiyim tzliesh. Okay, zok to Gemara. Mavushal. What if you ate korban pesach that was cooked? Again, like a stein, for the same reason. Mishum mavushal, mishum loisachlu kiyim tzliesh. How about if it was no and mavushal? You had a kazayis of each. Then like a shalosh, then you would get three malchis. You get for the altaychlu mimenu no, for the altaychlu mimenu bashal mavushal, and altaychlu mimenu kiyim tzliesh. That is the shita of Rava. But Abaye Amar ain't looking at lav shabachlolis. You don't get malchus on lav shabachlolis. So at first glance, before we get into the Gemara, it would tell us that you never get malchus for the altaychlu mimenu kiyim tzliesh. You never ever get malchus for that. You could only get malchus either for the na or for the bashal mavushal. However, we're going to see the Gemara offers a variation of that. So ikad amri, there's one way to understand Abaye is tarti hu delay lucky, but chada mia lucky. Even though you don't get two malchus, you get one malchus. And what does that mean? This means you actually do get malchus for tzliesh under certain circumstances. So let's see Rashi. Ikad amri tarti de lucky. Kivan shuloika mishum na, or mishum bashal mavushal. So if you ate it na, or if you ate it bashal mavushal, where there's a specific law for what you did, there you would only get the malchus of the na or the mavushal, and you would not get the malchus for the ki'im tzliesh. Suloi laki mishum klal the ki'im tzliesh, because you're already covered up. You're already covered by the aveira of loisayich l'meyan na. Avol chadam yalaki. But what if you were not able to violate the na or the mavushal? For instance, you ate it completely raw, or you ate it cooked in chametferia. And you ate it. The ain kan malchus to bishul, v'loy malchus shana. Here, what you did does not qualify to get malchus under the two specific itzurim, because it's not bishul and it's not na. So if you have no other isser involved, then like a mishum kiyim tzliesh. So here in this nusach Abai saying, even though you say ein loikin alav shabachlolis, that's only if we can cover you with a different lav. For instance, if you ate it na, or if you ate it mavushal, where there's a specific lav to address what you did, there you won't get malchus for the kiyim tzliesh. But if what you did will not qualify you for malchus under any of the two specific headings, such as na b'vashal mavushal, rather you ate it chai, you ate it mavushal b'chametferia, or you ate it completely burnt, although you're not covered by the two lavin of na and b'vashal mavushal, there you will get malchus because of the kiyim tzliesh. Or ikadamri chadanami lelaki lemiyachid lavi kalav dechasima. Or it's an absolute that Abai is saying that you can never ever get malchus for the aveir of kiyim tzliesh, because it doesn't fit the model of what a lav is supposed to look like. The pasuk that discusses the halachas of giving malchus is right after the lav of loisachsim shor b'dishoy, and by loisachsim shor b'dishoy, the Torah is very specific as to what you need to do to violate it. You have to make chasimus hashor. Therefore, we learn that any other lav that you get malchus have to be specific, which excludes a general lav such as loisoichlu kiyim tzliesh. That doesn't qualify as a lav, and you won't get malchus for it regardless. So those are the three options we have. We have Rava who else you get malchus for lav shabachlolos, even though you're getting a malchus for the nor, the bashal mavushal. Then there's a first Shita and Abaya, who hold that you don't get malchus for the lav shebachlolos if you can be covered up by a specific lav, but if you don't have any other lav, then you still fall into the general fail-safe lav of the lav shebachlolos. And then there's a second shot in the Abaya who holds you'll never ever get malchus for lav shebachlolos, and therefore the only way to get malchus for achilas carbon pesach is if you either ate it not or basal mavushal. If you ate it in any other fashion, although there's an isra say or there's an isra lav shebachlolos, you don't get malchus for it. And in a similar machlokes you have when it comes to Nazir. So let's look up the pasuk by Nazir. It's in Parshas Nazir, so we have an idea of what we're talking about. The Heilige pasuk as follows. In Parshas Nazir, when it talks about the parsha of the Nazir. So let's see what we have over here. Here we go. We're the Chumash over here. It says Ish Kiyaf Neder. So it says as follows: Miyayin v'shecher yazir, Choymitz yayin v'choymitz shecher lo yishta, v'chol mishras nanov miyishta, v'anov melachim v'veishim lo yoichel. Kol Yemei Nizrei. This is what we're focused on. Kol Yemei Nizrei. All of the days of his Naziris. Mikoil asher ye'asa nigefen hayayin. Anything, any product of the wine plant, and then it gets specific. Mechartzanim v'adzog lo yoichel. So the Torah specifies chartzanim and zog, and then there's the lav shebachlolos mikol asher ye'asa nigefen hayayin. So very similar to the situation that we have here by the bishul of the Korban Pesach. We have two items listed specifically, and then we have the general clause that says that any product that comes out of the wine plant is not allowed. So Zog to Gemara, Rav Amar, Ochel Zog, if you ate a peel of a grape, loikeshtayim, and that's because of the pasuk of Mechatan Vadak Lo Yoichel and Kolashe Yosy Megefen Hayayin Lo Yoichel. So those are the two malchus. Chartzen, if you ate a seed, again loikeshtayim. Zog v'chartzen loikesholis. Abaya Amar ein loikena lav shebachlolis. You don't get malchus for lav shebachlolis, which is the Kolashe Yosy Megefen Hayayin. Ikodami Tati Lalaki Chadami Alaki, just like by Korban Pesach, and Ikodami Chadanami Lalaki Lemiyachad Lave Kalav Dechasima. Zog to Gemara Vayt. Tanarbon. Now we get into some more specifics. Achal kazayis no mibayjoin. Now you're not allowed to eat the Korban Pesach not properly cooked, but the mitzvah of Korban Pesach, the mitzvah of Achilas Korban Pesach, is only at night. What if you ate not properly roasted Korban Pesach by day? What would the halacha be? Zog to Gemara, or kazayis no. I'm sorry, so the Gemara it's potter. The Bryce says that's potter. Kazayis no mishachashecha. If you ate raw or not properly cooked Korban Pesach at nighttime during the chiyuv of Korban Pesach, then you'll be chayiv. What about achol kazayis tzli miboidyon? What if you ate a kazayis of properly prepared Korban Pesach, but you ate it too early? Zok the Gemara like pasal atzmai b'bnei chabura. You didn't disqualify yourself from once again eating with your chabura Pesach by night. Why should that be a disqualification? Zok Rashi, the Armina Lakaman, the Gemara is going to teach us later that Eina Pesach Nechal loy b'shtei chaburas ke'echad. You could not eat the Korban Pesach in two different chaburas. You could only eat it in one chabur. So even though if there's 10 people who combine to bring a Korban Pesach, they can split up 5 to eat in one house and 5 in another house. They could do that. But you can't join both those groups. You have to pick which 5 you want to eat with. You can't be part of both those chaburas, even though they're both eating the same Korban Pesach. And we know this halacha from the pasuk that says, "Bebayis echad yachal, u'mitagamin bechabura chad yisachal." It has to be eaten in one chabura. Zok Rashi v'achila demibayid yoim lav achilahi. Eating it by day is not an achila. So therefore, if you ate a kazayis of tzli from your Korban Pesach before the zman achila, meaning by day, we don't say that now if you eat it with your chabura, it's like you eaten it in 2 separate chaburas, because that's not considered achilahi. And therefore, in b'nei chabura shenimna imoim. You could still eat with your chabura at night. because what you ate during the day does not count. So again, ochal kazayis tzli mi boy joim, leposel atzmei b'dei chabura. Kazayis tzli mi shecha. But if you ate kazayis tzli at night, once the chiv was there, before you join your chabura, now posel atzmei b'dei chabura, you can no longer eat with your chabura, because now it comes out that you would have eaten the Korban Pesach in two places, and that is prohibited. Tanya idach, yachol achol kazayis nami boy joim yechayiv. You might think if you ate a partially cooked or partially roasted kazayis of Korban Pesach before Pesach starts during the afternoon, you might think you'd be chayiv v'dinu, and in fact, there's a svara to argue that you should be chayiv, unlike what we said before. Uma b'shah sheyeshnoi b'kum echol tzli. Madich, when it's mutter to eat this Korban Pesach at night, you're just restricted to eat it sleep, but at least it's mutter to eat. Yeshnoi b'val toichal no. You're not allowed to eat it not properly cooked. At a time where you're not even allowed to eat it sleep, like in the afternoon before Pesach. Surely there should be an isser to eat it no, because it's a more prohibited time in general. If you can't even eat it sleep, then surely you should not be able to eat it no. Oi, loy. Maybe you could say differently. When in Shasha Einay Bekum Echel Tzli, Yesh Never Bal Teichel No. Shasha Yesh Never Bekum Echel Tzli, Ain't Never Bal Teichel No. Maybe you'll say that when there's when there's no mitzvah to eat tzli, for instance, erev Yom Tov in the afternoon, that's where you have an isser to eat it no. But during the time where you're supposed to eat it tzli, maybe there is no isser of Bal Teichel No, because again, there's less isser. When there's no heter to eat the Korban Pesach at all, then there's a lav to eat it raw. At night, when there's a heter to eat it, maybe there is no isser. There is no lav of Bal Teichel No. It won't be mutter, but maybe there wouldn't be a lav. So zok to Gemara, Ba'al Tama, and don't think this is unusual. Sharei hutter mechalaloi etzel tzli. You see that there's a kula in the Korban Pesach when it comes Pesach by night. Because up until Pesach by night, you were not allowed to eat the Korban Pesach. And now there's a kula. You're allowed to eat the Korban Pesach. So maybe that should also extend to tell you that there's no more lav even to eat it raw. Look, Rashi about the time of Sharei Hutter B'chol Etzli, Ta'afilu Tzli Haya Osher Lechol B'yoyim. B'yoyim, Erev Pesach, it was Osher even to eat his Korban Pesach properly prepared. And we're medayik v'loy b'yoyim. When the nighttime arrived, the Torah relaxed the isser of eating the Korban Pesach sli and allows you now at night to eat it sli. So therefore, let's stretch it and say v'neiman nami nehid hutter lechatchila etzel no. Even though we wouldn't argue that you're allowed to eat it lechatchila not properly cooked. You shouldn't be mechuyev alav because you see the Torah relaxed the restrictions of eating the Korban Pesach come Pesach by night. Talmud Leimer al toichlu mimenu no uvashal bevushal b'mayim kiyim tzliyesh. She'ain Talmud Leimer kiyim tzliyesh. The Torah didn't have to stick in kiyim tzliyesh. The Torah already said you can't eat it no, you can't eat it bashal bevushal. Why do I need the Torah to stick in kiyim tzliyesh? Uma Talmud Leimer kiyim tzliyesh. Why does the Torah stick in these extra words of kiyum tzliyesh? Learn malach to tell you, at the time where there's a mitzvah to eat it tzli, that's when the lav of yeshnei b'val toichel no. But at the point where you're not allowed to eat it tzli, meaning before Pesach arrives, erev Pesach in the afternoon, einay b'val toichel no. So from this limud, and the Gemara is going to ask soon, we need kiyum tzliyesh for the lav shebechlolos to answer the other types of achilas. But right now the Gemara says kiyum tzliyesh is extra, and it's to tell you that when does the lav of al toichelu mimenu no or al toichelu mimenu boshel mavushel, when do those lavin apply? They only apply at a time where it's mutter to eat the Korban Pesach tzliyesh. Right? Rabbi Omer ekri ani. I'm going to Rashi says Dayach Havalei B'Kriyas Bashel Ekrani Bashel. I'm going to be medayik from the fact that it says Uvoshel Mavushel B'Mayim. So that's where I'm going to extract my information from. Matam Mavushal, it could have said Bashel. It didn't have to say Bashal Mavushal B'mayim. It could have just said Bashal. So why does it say Mavushal? Sheyochel, I would think. Ainli Ella Shebishloi Mechashecha. I would have thought that when is there an Isser Bishul of the Korban Pesach? That's only if I cooked it already Pesach by night. But what happens if Bishloi Miboy Joim? What if I cooked the Korban Pesach Erev Pesach? I didn't cook it on Pesach. Minayin, how do I know there's a lav? So maybe the only Isser, the main Isser, the main lav to eat cooked Korban Pesach is only if you cooked it at night. But Bishlam Bajoim and the Acholim Mishatech, Minayin, how do you know there's a lav there? No matter when it was cooked, no matter when it was cooked, even if it was cooked on the Erev Yom Tov, there's still a lav to eat it at night. Didn't we just learn about Aleph, where Rebbe wanted to know, how do you know that Shar Mashkin, how do you know that's usher to cook the Korban Pesach and Shar Mashkin? And Rebbe used the word Bashal Mavushal to teach us that. And from there we also learned that even if it's cooked in its own juices, it's going to be usher to eat. So how do you have this Bashal Mavushal extra to teach you that even if it's cooked mibajoim that it's usher? You need Bashal Mavushal to teach you that you're not allowed to cook it in any other mashkes. Well, the Shar Mashkin. Zok Rebbe, I can extract two pieces of information from the Bashal Mavushal. Because in Kain Lemikra, Oy Bashal Bashal, Oy Mavushal Mavushal. Why did the Torah change? I understand the double lashon, but why did the Torah in its double lashon also change the two words? My Bashal Mavushal, Shemas Minatarti, we can extract two limudim from here. A is that cooking in anything other than the water will also be considered a lav, and B, cooking it no matter when, even if you cooked it on Erev Pesach, there will also be a lav.
Yosy, is the Gemara suggesting there's a separate lav for actually cooking it? The Torah just says you can't eat it cooked.
There is no lav for cooking it. The Gemara is not suggesting that.
So what was the Havamina that you would not be allowed, that you would be allowed to eat cooked meat if it was cooked before Shkia?
Because the Torah is only, you might think the Torah is only answering eating it cooked if it was cooked at night, but not if it was cooked by day.
That doesn't make any sense if there's no Isser to cook it.
1 second.
Okay.
I hear what you're asking. I mean, let's see what the Gemara says again. It says,
Right, because it says you have to eat it in Sliesh.
that's when eating it. What about for preparing it? Preparing it is Rebbe, right? Ainly Rebbe Omer, Ekrani Bashel. So you're asking me, why should it make a difference when I prepared it if the Isser is not to prepare it, the Isser is to eat it?
Yeah,
So
you'd be over, you'd be mevatel and asay, right? Because that meat would no longer be edible for Korban Pesach. I got that.
So let's see where Rashi says over. Rashi says, "Ainly sheischayev al achilas basar, elam came bishlam mishachashecha." And Rashi sticks in 3 words to explain why. Shehu ikers manai. So it could be the bishul only makes a problem if you're making the bishul at that time. So it's not just the bishul; it's the bishul at the time that creates the isra achila. So it's not just the way it's prepared; it's the way it's prepared and when it's prepared.
Wow.
But it's a chiddush. I mean, it's a chiddush to say that the time of cooking should impact it.
Right.
But at the end of the day, the Gemara says, I brought up before, how could you use kiyum tzliyesh to tell you that the only isser to eat it prepared the wrong way is at the time when there's a mitzvah to eat it tzliyesh? Don't we need the kiyum tzliyesh to include all the other yisurim like chai and choruch? So Tosha asked the kasha. I got mixed up. I thought the Gemara asked the kasha. So Tosha asked the kasha. The last Tosha on the skinny line. Shein tamad loymer kiyum tzliyesh. Frek Tosha afagav de itzrich lahalkos alav mishum kiyum tzliyesh. We needed to get malchus. We discussed on top of the Amud that according to Rav you can get 3 malchus. According to Bai you get 1 malchus for it. So Zok Tosha hainu nami mishum desach desamche lena mavushal. We're learning many things from the fact that the Torah wrote Kiyum Tzliyesh right near Noam Avushal. We can learn a lot of things from that fact. A, we learned that the Isra Noam Avushal only applies when there's a mitzvah to eat Kiyum Tzliyesh, but we also learned that there's Lavan. So it's not a stira to learn both things out of the fact that they're close to each other. So we learned that there's a lav for the kim tzliyesh, but we also learned that the lav can only apply at the time where you're supposed to eat it tzliyesh. So Dr. Martaner about what happens if you ate something roasted by day? So the halacha is chayiv. You're chayiv. So this is not like what we said earlier. Ukazayis no mishechashecha, and if you ate something that was raw at night or not fully cooked, not chayiv, you're also chayiv. Katani, we learned tzli dom yedana. The iser of tzli should be similar to the iser of no. Ma no belav, just like there's a lav, and therefore you're chayiv malchus for eating it no. Av tzli belav. So too, the tzli that you ate b'yom, you'll be chayiv. In other words, the problem is where does it say that you get malchus for eating it by day? It doesn't say that anywhere. So therefore, the Gemara says, "Katani Zakrashi chiyuva that tzli in b'yom dumyo de chiyuva de namishachashecha." So we learned the same way there's a lav. Since we compare the tzli to the na, we darshan the same way there's a lav on eating the na when you're not allowed to eat the na. So too, there'll be a lav that you get malchus for if you eat tzli when you're not supposed to, which is a very big chiddush. There's actually a lav about it. Where do you find a lav referring to eating it miboy join? You have to eat the basar at night, like Rashi quoted earlier. Balayla in b'yoim loy. So we learn it from a diak. There's a law from a diak of an essay. The Torah says, eat the korban pesach by night, and we make a diak, eat it by night and not by day. In fact, the Gemara, high lav haba mechlal asehu, v'chalav haba mechlal asay. If we only know a lav because we're medayig it from the assay, you don't get malchus for that. So it's Sarik Shver on this brisa. Why is it achal timi b'yoyim chayiv? You don't have any lav for it. You only have a diak of a lav haba mechlal asay. This is going according to Rabbi Yehuda, who actually holds that a lav above machlala say is a lav. The Tanya, it says sor v'seh soru v'kolit nedavatasai. If you have animals that have mumen and they cannot be brought as karbonis, you should make them as an adava, meaning you matches them lebedek abayis. And we make a diak. Oisoi atamatas lebedek abayis. Only animals that are not royu to be brought as karbonis, only animals that have mumen, those animals you're allowed to give only to bedek abayis. It's also to take an animal that's royu to be brought as a carbon and give it to bedek abayis just for its value. An animal like that has to be brought as a carbon. Anybody who's matvis to mimel bedek abayis, meaning he takes an animal that's right to be a carbon and he donates it to bedek abayis and not as a carbon, over ba'aseh, he's over on an assay. Only ela ba'aseh. We only know that there's an assay. But loy says 79. How do you know there's a loy says well? At the end of the Torah, at the beginning of the parasha, Rashi says it says Veidaber Hashem al Moshe Lemor, introducing this pasuk of Shor v'Seh Surur v'Kolet. So we learn from the Lemor. Limed, this is like Chassidish Torah. Limed al kol parsha kula sheyehei b'loisaseh. We learn from the lemor that it should be a loisaseh, and the Gemara is going to explain in a minute why. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So therefore, by Korban Pesach, it also says lemor, and therefore, if you eat it before you're supposed to, it's also allowed. Amar loy Rabbi lebakapara, my mashma. How do you see in the lemor that there's any type of lav here? Amar loy dechsev lemor. Loy noimar bidvarim. There was these subjects that we're about to discuss after the Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe Lemar loy nemar bidvarim. The commandment of no was given over for these things. In other words, there's all these things that we're about to suggest. Following the pasuk of Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe Lemar, they're covered with a lav. Which lav? The loy nemar.
I think it's loy nemar bidvarim. There's a loy said with all these things. There's a loy.
A loy number, all of the following things, there's a loy said.
Have a loy in it. They have a loy.
Okay.
Beautiful.
Okay, good. They Rav Amri, Lamar, Lav Emor. Tell them no. So let's see actually. Lav emor lahen sheyesh iser lav bidvarim. So there's two ways to learn it. Either it means lemor, tell them that there's an iser lav. So it's a commandment telling Moshe to tell Klal Yisrael there's an iser lav. That's the second shot. And loy nemar bidvarim is not commanding Moshe to tell that to Klal Yisrael. It's just telling us as a general knowledge. You should know that the things that we're about to tell you, they're also to do with a lav. So from there, you know that even certain things that are a lav above Mechalasei, if it has the pasuk of Veidaber Hashem al Moshe Lemar introducing these halachas, there's a lav there as well, and that's how we know that there's a lav to eat the Korban Pesach erev Pesach in the afternoon.
Isn't that throughout the Torah that says Veidaber Hashem Moshe Lemar? Well,
right, and that's why from there he learns that every lav above Mechalasei is going to say. So you're asking me, even if it's not a lav above Mechalasei, it should still be a lav. So
right.
Tosfos points that out. So Tosfos says, "Near Lari, the Hanu Davka b'Hanach Tavarim the Isbahu Lav Abba Mechalasei." We only apply this special drush of Lamor where there's anyway a Lav Abba Mechalasei. Aval Shar Dvarim Loi, but normally you won't. So you don't use Lamor everywhere. You only use it when there's a Lav Abba Mechalasei.
But and it's only according to Rabbi Yehuda.
That's correct. So only according to Rabbi Yehuda is there a Lav to eat the Korban Pesach early. According to everybody else, it's not a mitzvah, but you don't get malchus for it.
Beautiful.
Okay, I was hoping to finish the parak, but we have time to finish the parak tomorrow.
Shkoyach.
Shkoyach.